Hello and welcome to the NBA Outlet presented by OTGBasketball.com. I'm your host, Nick Fay. With me, as always, Kory Waldron and special guest, Lazarus Jackson, editor of Detroit Bad Boys as well. He hosts their podcast. What's up, guys?
How's it going? Thanks for having me, Nick and Kory. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to talking about the Pistons.
Yeah, Laz, happy to have you on. Hopefully this doesn't turn into Malice at the Palace Part 2.
We got a Pacers and Pistons fan in here. It's going to be interesting. But as always, before we get started, you can check us out on iTunes, Blog Talk Radio, OTGBasketball.com, Google Play, and Dash Radio. But before we look at next season, we're going to look back at last year. 39-43 for the Pistons. Blake Griffin trade. Reggie Jackson was injured, only played 45 games. Stan Van Gundy fired at the end of the season. What are your thoughts on last year?
So last year was a roller coaster for the Pistons. They started out 14-6. Then they lost 7 straight games to start December. Then they finished the rest of the month 6-2. Reggie Jackson got hurt the day after Christmas, and so that really was when the season turned. They were 3-11 in January, which was just like sinks their entire season. At the end of January, they pulled off the Blake Griffin trade, so they went 5-3 after the trade and before the All-Star break. After the All-Star break, they went 3-10 before Reggie Jackson returned, and then they were 8-4 after Reggie Jackson came back. So just like a lot of ups and downs based upon just health and scheduling for Detroit last season.
Yeah, I mean, Reggie Jackson keeps getting banged up. He's got the knee tendonitis, which never goes away. We saw Van Gundy get fired. The acquisition of Blake Griffin is intriguing. I mean, now they got, Blake Griffin, Andre Drummond to be this, dynamic big man duo. I want to see how that looks when they actually have a point guard that's healthy and on the floor. Hopefully that can be Reggie Jackson, but just hasn't been. Guys like Luke Kennard I thought were decent. It's just unfortunate this Pistons team seems to be a team that you think is going to be a lock to make, the playoffs between the 6 and 8 seed, and they just can't seem to get over the hump.
Yeah, the Pistons were on a 49-win pace with Reggie Jackson. They were 27-18 with him on the court, and they were 12-25 without him. I don't know what that equates out to. That looks like about like a 30-win team, and so you can just see how much, maybe not even Reggie Jackson himself, but quality point guard play matters to this team in particular.
Laz, what do you think is, the moving forward with Reggie Jackson? What's going to happen? Is he the guy, or should they make a move and try to bring somebody else in because of this tendonitis and this injury history where he's not really able to be on the court? And like you just mentioned, point guard play is so important, not only for the Pistons, but the entire NBA.
So I have been an advocate of not necessarily replacing him, because I think at this point it'd be really difficult to get a better starting point guard for like in a trade, or the Pistons have no space to sign a starting quality point guard. And so you're kind of just better writing him out until the end of that deal. What I've been a fan of is advocating shoring up the backup point guard position. Ish Smith was a serviceable point guard for the team, but he is limited in ways that really cramp the offense when he's a starter. He's much better off the bench, where he gets to play a lot faster in transition. Guys, there's less scouting of his weaknesses when he's coming off the bench. But as a part of the starters, guys play off of him. The offense has less spacing when he's starting like alongside a Stanley Johnson. Then you've got 2 non-shooters on the floor, 3 if you include Andre. And so like the spacing is just awful. And that was a big reason why a lot of the times the Pistons struggled when Reggie Jackson was out. So I was advocating trading Ish Smith maybe for an equally good backup point guard, but one who could also shoot threes off the dribble and attack a defense in that way. I feel like that would have solved maybe not all of the problems at point guard, but a good chunk of them. Even a guy like a DJ Augustine, not a starter level guy, but a guy who can make threes off the dribble, penetrate a defense, force rotations, and be a threat on the perimeter. I thought would have been huge for the Pistons.
Yeah, just kind of fill in that role and do those things. Like you said, not having 3 non-shooters on the floor is really tough in the NBA nowadays. What were your thoughts on the Blake Griffin deal when it happened? Were you happy? I mean, I believe everybody was surprised. What were your thoughts on it?
So surprise is definitely like I think the emotion that hit first. There was no, if you remember, like that was a thunderclap from Woj. Like
Yeah.
it came out of nowhere, and so you're just like, whoa, like okay, what's gonna happen? But the team had clearly struggled. Like I said, the roller coaster. They were clearly like on a down point in the season. It was at the time. It was like very much assumed that this was a trade that Stan Van Gundy made to try and keep his job. Since since then it's come out that like no, this is something that the owner Tom Gores was on board with. This is something that he really like I had thought of as a way to like get butts in seats and like make the team better in a way that they haven't had like a star player in like the last decade or so. And so from that perspective, it's a little bit more defensible. Blake himself, the player, was really effective for the Pistons. He averaged, I think, like 25 and 5, and there are really only like 6 or 7 other guys in the league who put up those kind of numbers. And the names on the list would like surprise you. It's like it's like the Hardens, the LeBrons, the KDs, the Boogies, like that type of guy. Like no one is saying that Blake is at that level. Like he's not, but his production is on those in that like arena. And so it's really good for the Pistons to have, I think, a finally like a star player. That's something that they've really missed over the last like 8 years, 10 years. And so I've slowly like come around on the Blake Griffin trade. Like the Blake Griffin contract, like that's still a problem. That's still like not great. But I believe that Blake will age gracefully into like the latter half of that deal. The last year on that deal is a player option. I think there is a not insignificant chance that you could get him to decline that and re-sign a long-term deal for less money. I think he would make like $39 million in the final year of that deal. I think you can get him like to decline that and offer him like a 3-year, $100 million deal, where he's still making like 30 million a year, but like 30, there's a difference between 30 and 40 million, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Kory, what were your thoughts on the trade?
I mean, as Laz said, it came out of left field. I mean, I don't think anyone saw this coming. I didn't hear any rumors tying Blake Griffin to the Pistons. It just happened. And you know, I understand it from the Pistons standpoint. You just needed to mix things up. It was, why not? If you can get a player to like Blake Griffin, he's an all-star. You know, it made a lot of sense to me. If Reggie Jackson was healthy, it would have made even more sense. This Pistons team probably makes it into the playoffs and probably, you know, maybe even a 6 seed or a 5 seed if everyone's healthy to end that season. And you know, the contract isn't great. Like you mentioned, $39 million that final year is eeks for what Blake Griffin could, you know, turn into depending on how the injuries go. As we know, you know, he's had a lot of leg injuries over the last, you know, 2-3 years. He's not that high flyer he once was. He's still a very good player. He's almost underrated at this point. You know, he can score, he can pass, he can rebound. He's a little bit of everything. So I still think he's very valuable. You know, the last year of that contract, I'm not sure how much he'll be worth, that $39 million, but it made sense for the Pistons, who have kind of been stuck in, you know, the middle of the pack in the East.
I will say that so the trade was basically Tobias Harris, Avery Bradley, Boban, and a pick for Blake Griffin. Tobias turned down a $80 million, like 20 per year extension this offseason. And so like you expect him to be looking for a contract next year in the neighborhood of like 27, 28 million in that like that range. And I will say I would much rather have Blake at like 35 to 39 million than Tobias at 28 to 32 million. Tobias was a really good player in Detroit, but he always just like left me and other Pistons fans just wanting like a little bit more. He turned himself into like a deadly perimeter shooter this year, but he still like never drew enough fouls. He never rebounded enough. He never could be like relied upon to engineer offense. When Reggie Jackson went down, his numbers tanked, and so it was like he didn't produce when the Pistons needed him to the most. And so I think there's a large segment of like Tobias Harris like fans out there in like the NBA Twitter sphere, and I think that we should just like acknowledge that Tobias is really, really good, but he'll never be great. And Blake was and has the potential I think, to at least be like great production wise for the Pistons.
I think that's a fair take. I think you're looking at Tobias and watching him. Sometimes you see games where he really goes off, and then other games where you're like, you could have been more aggressive, take advantage of your matchup a little bit more. But moving on from Blake and that trade, what was the highlight of last season for the Pistons?
So the highlight for me, at least, was the win over the Celtics in TD Garden. That was Avery Bradley's first game back. Avery Bradley kind of ended his Detroit tenure on a sour note, but it was nice to give him that victory at least. That produced like the signature like highlight play of the season. Andre Drummond like coming from half court to swipe an inbound pass, getting fouled on the dunk for the and one to like seal the game. That was like the third straight 2020 game Andre has had in TD Garden. And like I think that might have been like the 14th win in the 14-6 as I talked about at the beginning. So it's just like that was like literally the high point of the season. Of course, that happened in like December. You kind of don't want that, but yeah, that was definitely like the highlight of the Pistons season.
Yeah, my highlight was the Andre Drummond 20 for 20 games. Any of them. Anytime a big man puts up those kind of numbers, it's just, it eye pop. Like when Dwight Howard had 30-30, even though it was against the Nets, when you see those kind of numbers, they just stick out. And Andre Drummond has shown that, his free throw shooting numbers may struggle at times, but I think he was slightly better this year.
Oh, he was leagues better. He went from like sub 40% to like 60%.
Right. That's huge. It's a major jump for a guy like him. Yeah. And then, like you said, the 20 for 20 games stick out. I mean, there's not a lot of centers that can do that in today's league, and those kind of like throwback big men I still find very, very refreshing.
For me, I'm going to go with Reggie Bullock. I always try to go with the low-key guys. I liked his jump and three-point percentage up to 44%, more efficient, spent more time on the floor, and I think he kind of helped them, giving them a role player moving forward.
But yeah, Reggie was huge for this team last year. Sorry, God.
No. Honestly, I was kind of impressed. He kind of popped out of nowhere. I mean, I knew who he was before last season, but I felt like he became a lot more reliable player.
It was always a matter of like getting him on the court. He was always effective in his time, but like there were slight injury issues, and then the injuries would cause him to lose a spot in the rotation to other guys, and like other guys would play well ahead of him. So I think this is finally the year where like he stayed healthy and got a really good opportunity, and that marriage worked out really well for him and the Pistons.
Yeah, having three-point shooters like that is always great. But moving to the negative side, what was the biggest disappointment of last season?
So the low point of the season was a weekend Florida back-to-back against Orlando and Miami. This was after the Blake Griffin trade. And the Pistons were like they weren't out of the playoff spot. And I think if they had won both of those games, they would have been like the 7 seed with the tiebreaker over Miami. They lost to Orlando in just like really dispiriting fashion. Like nothing was working down the stretch. There was a lot of like Ish Smith like elbow jumpers, and you're just like, and this is like a literal playoff game for this team, and like they can't come up with anything. It was super frustrating. And then the game in Miami was on the second night of a back-to-back. After like a really dispiriting loss, they came out and struggled. I think Blake and Andre had good games that game. I think they were like really two guys that they got up for that game, but nobody else really did. And so that was kind of that was like the weekend. That was like the nail in the coffin in the season. They were still like mathematically alive for the playoffs, but like after that weekend, it was like this is not a playoff team.
Yeah, I felt like he lost hope.
Yeah, exactly.
For me, the disappointment for me has got to be Reggie Jackson. I mean, anytime your point guards, and as we've already talked about numerous times, Tobias Harris, as you mentioned, his numbers dropped when Reggie Jackson got hurt. And obviously Blake Griffin and Andre Drummond didn't get to really have that kind of time with Reggie Jackson to form, relationships, especially Blake Griffin. And I think Ish Smith was decent, but I mean, he's just not an everyday starter, and like he just can't play those kind of heavy minutes. So for me, it was just the fact that they just didn't have their point guard in Reggie Jackson.
For me, disappointment, I think Reggie Jackson, like you said, and obviously getting out of the playoffs, like run definitely hurt. So not making the playoffs, I think is the biggest thing that stuck out to me. I mean, you make the trade for Blake Griffin and you want to get in there, but also January where they went 3-11. I think anytime when you want to be a playoff team and you have a month like that, it's always rough.
Yeah, January was really rough because if I remember correctly, those were like a bunch of winnable games. Hang on, I'm pulling it up now. It was like they lost like a game in Chicago on like a Reggie Bullock missed like a last second layup. They what? They no.
I think they might. I can't remember if it was February or January. They played the Nets, and I know Spencer Dinwiddie hit a game winner against them as well.
Stuff like that like happened, and it's just like they lost to Chicago on like a buzzer beater layup. They lost to Charlotte. They got embarrassed by Charlotte at home. They lost like a really bad game to Toronto. They lost an overtime game to Utah where Dre had like 30 and 25, and they still like managed to find a way to lose that game. January was really, really rough.
Yeah, anytime you have a month like that, it just always hurts so much. But moving on from last season onto this year, looking at this year's ranking via the OTG staff, the Pistons are coming in at number 19. Do you think this is fair, too high, too low? What are your thoughts?
So where's that in the Eastern Conference, I guess? Would that have them like 9th or 10th or 8th, or where's that in the East?
It would have them as the 8th seed.
Okay. So that is, I think, fair for where the Pistons are like projected this year. When you're looking at other teams, the Pistons like could lap. Obviously, like Cleveland stands out. I personally am not a huge fan of what Washington did this offseason, and think that if any like injuries happen there, like that team could collapse pretty quickly. Miami like didn't get any better and had like a really weird year, so you think maybe the Pistons can like jump them. But like, I think honestly, like from an unbiased opinion, like the 8th seed is about like as high as you can put the Pistons from the outside looking in.
Yeah, I think this is a fair rating for pretty much every reason Laz just said. You know, we got to see how this team can stay healthy. We got to see what they look like. But as of right now, it's fair. And I mean, I'll be surprised with how the East is this year if this Pistons team, even regardless of some injuries, doesn't make the 8th seed.
It'll be really interesting to see like which Western Conference fan base like complains that their team didn't make the playoffs when they win like 45 games and the Pistons make the playoffs with like 42 wins. My money's on Denver. Those guys love to complain.
Yeah, no, for sure. There's definitely going to probably be 1 or 2 teams in the West that don't get in and complain about it. But I agree. I think it's a pretty fair ranking. I think the Pistons have the potential to go up if the talent all gels. But right now, with the roller coaster they had last season and the year before, it wasn't too crazy either. So they're always kind of making us expect more, and they never give it to us. So this is the year to kind of prove it. But moving on to this year's additions, we'll start with the biggest one probably, and that's Dwayne Casey, Coach of the Year, new head coach of the Pistons. What are your thoughts on him coming in and kind of running the show?
So I am really excited about Dwayne Casey insofar as I think Stan Van Gundy had kind of lost this team by the end of the year, and like I was advocating keeping Stan, but only because I was never like confident that the ownership and the front office could go out and like bring in the reigning coach of the year, right?
Yeah. It's very rare.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm curious to see what Casey installs like on offense. A lot of what the Raptors did even last year when they revamped the offense was like flowing through Kyle and DeMar DeRozan. The Pistons obviously don't have Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan. They have Blake Griffin and Andre Drummond. So I'm curious to see how Casey shifts the offense to kind of focus on those two guys. And defensively, I think a lot of the principles that Stan Van Gundy like implemented will still be in place. They still will like rarely foul, rarely give up transition baskets. They'll still have Andre Drummond, one of the literal best rebounder in the league, to snuff out a lot of transition opportunities for other teams. And so I'm really excited for Casey for a new voice. When they brought him in, his thing was like, I'm going to develop Stanley Johnson. I'm going to develop Luke Kennard. I'm going to develop Henry Ellenson. Like, I'm going to make these young guys who Stan Van Gundy either like actively sabotage the confidence of, or like just didn't play enough. Like, I'm going to make these guys like worthwhile producers. And so Henry Ellenson looked really bad in summer league, and there's a lot of trepidation about his role moving forward with the Pistons. But Luke Kennard like didn't play because of an injury, but everyone loves Luke. Like, we expect great things out of Luke. Stanley Johnson, really getting meaningful offensive production out of Stanley Johnson, like through confidence, through like loving him hard, or like whatever the quote Casey said earlier this offseason would just be huge for Casey. And so I think like less tactically and more like emotionally, I think is how Pistons fans are like ready to embrace Dwayne Casey.
Yeah, I mean, what's crazy is the fact that this is the coach of the year. This is the guy who won coach of the year last season. So I think anytime you're adding a coach who's coming off, obviously what was a really good year in Toronto, despite how it may have ended, I think it's a good move. I think it's not bad to change the voice in the locker room. I feel like Van Gundy he kind of like wears out teams, which is how he is. He's feels like he's ill-tempered. He gets angry rather quick. Like you mentioned,
there were a bunch of times last year where like the Pistons would, well, not a bunch, but like when the Pistons would play like the national game, you'd see them like ask Dre about like how Stan like yells at them in practice, and Dre would like bust out his Stan Van Gundy yelling impression, and you'd be like, oh god, like these dudes do not want to play for this guy.
Yeah. And there you go. And now you have Dwayne Casey, who I feel like a lot of the players respect. I know the guys in Toronto for sure respected him. He just seems like he's got a good head on his shoulders, and I'm interested to see how he can, get this Detroit team to the next level. Because I think in Toronto, especially last season, he changed pretty much his entire offensive philosophy to try and get the ball moving more. The bench unit, obviously, they had the best bench in the league last year in Toronto. So I'm interested to see not just what he does with having Blake Griffin and Andre Drummond, which, as you mentioned, he's never had big men like that. He had guards in Kyle Lowry, DeMar DeRozan. So he's flipping the kind of position that he's got all the talent in, and maybe he can turn this bench up another level.
Yeah, and given the Pistons cap situation, this is probably one of the best ads they could do. They didn't have a lot of options to add players, so they had a great head coach. But moving on to the draft, no first-round pick, but they did have 2 second-round picks. They drafted Kory Thomas and Bruce Brown. What are your thoughts on these two? Do you expect them to see time with the Pistons this year or more G League? What are your thoughts?
So both of those guys should be more G League guys, but it's not for a lack of talent. It's more just because there's a lot of people in front of them in terms of the rotation. Kory Thomas was an exciting draft pick. That was a guy that a lot of people had like I had a first round grade on. Long defender, can shoot threes already, especially the corner three. Reminds a lot of people of Avery Bradley, like in a good way, not necessarily like the 18-footer coming off a DHO way, but in like the hounding defense, on-ball defense kind of way. And then Bruce Brown, less was known about him, I think, going into the draft. He had like an injury in Miami, and like that kind of wrecked his second year. But what he showed in summer league, the ability to like lead an offense at 6'5", he was really good at attacking the basket and drawing contact and getting to the line. The jumper needs like a little bit of work, I think. I don't know if he'll ever be able to like take like a pull-up three, like a Dame or like a Steph or anything like that. But like with time, I think he could get to like a good like catch and shoot place, and then make him like a very viable like point guard in the NBA. So I think there's a lot of interest in both of those guys, but there's also like if one of them plays like major minutes, like something has gone wrong,
Any thoughts on them, Kory?
Kory Thomas was connected to the Pacers for a while. I know a lot of mock drafts had the Pacers drafting him, so I kept like a small eye on him. He's athletic. I don't know how much we'll see of these guys this first year, but who knows? Some time in the G League, maybe they impress and they end up getting a chance. I think Kory Thomas does have a chance though to be a rotational player in the future. He's 6'4". He has decent wingspan, but I'm not expecting too much this season.
Moving on to free agent signings, like I mentioned, not a ton of cap space. They signed Glenn Robinson, 2 years, $8 million in change. Second year, non-guaranteed. Obviously, an athletic wing. Played with the Pacers, showed a good amount when he was healthy, but last year, after being injured, never looked the same. What are your thoughts on bringing him in?
So I am super high on Glenn Robinson III. I am probably the most endeared person with GR3 that you could have like had on this podcast. I think he should start, honestly. We have a lot of proof that Stanley Johnson is like an actively damaging offensive player when he's on the court. Defense be damned, and I think that this Piston team's like needs his offense. GR3 shot 47% on corner threes over the last 2 years. The corner threes are a shot that like you can very easily get around like a Blake Griffin post up or Reggie Jackson, Andre Drummond like pick and roll. And so I think he has the positional size and offensive skill set to be like an impact player right away for this team. I really love that signing. That was a really nice job by Ed Stefanski.
Not only did he shoot 47% from corner threes, but he also the game winner from the corner as well against the Hawks 2 years ago.
Yeah.
I was actually sad to see Glenn Robinson go. He broke his ankle before last season, so he missed basically the entire season. I think he played 23 games. He just didn't have his legs underneath him fully, but he still shot 42% from the field and 41% from three. I'm a big fan of him as well. He's a good 3-and-D guy. He's 6'6". He still has a lot of room to grow. I mean, he's only 25 years old. So I think this is a really good move. I wouldn't be surprised if he does end up starting for the Detroit Pistons because he can be that guy. In Indiana, I think if he doesn't get hurt last year, I think the rotation for the Pacers becomes a lot different. I think Glenn Robinson probably is the starting small forward over Bogdanovich. But because Glenn Robinson wasn't there, Bogdanovich started, and Bogdanovich obviously played really well for the Pacers. But Glenn Robinson, I think, has a really big upside, and I really like the fit for Detroit. Like you mentioned, Stanley Johnson offensively has given them rather not a lot in general, like just nothing. And Glenn Robinson can play the same amount of defense as Stanley and probably be a bigger offensive player. And like you mentioned, getting corner threes from a Blake Griffin pick or whatever should be fun to watch.
Yeah, I agree with you guys. I think this was a nice move, a nice value signing, taking advantage of the situation Robinson was in, and you get him at a good price, second year non-guaranteed if it doesn't work out as well. But moving on from there, they signed 2 vets, Jose Calderon, Zaza Pachulia, both 1-year deals on the vet minimum. What are your thoughts on these guys? Just locker room presence?
So Zaza might actually get a chance to play. The Pistons cut last year's backup center in Eric Moreland in order to offer Zaza the minimum, the vet min. And right now, like the other ostensible backup center, John Lure, hurt his ankle. And so we think he'll be ready for the start of the season. But he was hurt for the vast majority of last year as well. So Zaza might actually play, which is concerning.
For the Pistons or the other team? No.
There you go. Yeah. But I think Zaza still has some game left in him. Obviously, with Andre in there and Blake able to play some 5. I don't know if they'll be leaning on him for 25 minutes a night or anything crazy like that. But I think he's still got some game left in him. And Jose Calderon is a third string point guard. He's a very solid acquisition in that sense. Like I said earlier, when Reggie Jackson went down and the Pistons were forced to start Ish Smith, they really could have used a guy who shot the ball around the starting lineup. Jose Calderon, if he can do one thing in the NBA, it's shoot the ball. And so I think there's a possibility that if Reggie Jackson goes down, you might see Ish stay with the bench and Jose just kind of be the caretaker starting point guard for a little bit. I'll be intrigued to see how that works out. Jose is 37. He's not the best defender in the world, but I was surprised at how effective he was in Cleveland. But I wonder how much of that is a factor of playing a lot of minutes next to LeBron, and the Pistons don't have a LeBron to hide a lot of what makes Calderon a below average NBA player at this point in his career. And so I like both of those signings in a vacuum. I think that's when you're hey, who can we get from for the minimum? To do a lot better than those guys would be, I think, really hard to do. And so I think the Pistons did okay to get those 2 guys.
Yeah, I agree. I think, Zaza, I think he plays by, 15, 20 minutes at best. He's just kind of now your enforcer. And then Jose Calderon, like you mentioned, if anything happens to Reggie Jackson again, at least now you have, an experienced point guard who can shoot the ball. Obviously, you don't want to rely on Calderon for long stretches and for long periods during the season. But this is still a guy who's been around for a long time and knows how to, run an offense.
Yeah, Calderon seems like he's just a good locker room guy. He just seems like he gives off a good vibe to his teammates and whatnot, and kind of explain things. And Zaza, like you mentioned, Laz, he's hopefully not going to play a ton, but when he does play, he can still rebound, set a good pick. He understands how to play basketball. Looking at departures, though, James Ennis, Anthony Tolliver, Eric Moreland, Jameer Nelson, Kay Fielder, Dwight Bucks, What are your thoughts on these guys? Do you wish they kept anybody, or it's not a big deal they lost these dudes?
So it would have like taken them going into the tax to keep him, but Anthony Tolliver was really, really good for the Pistons last year. He like his bench shooting papered over a lot of cracks offensively for that unit, and he was really effective, like surprisingly effective defensively at times. He was a great locker room presence as well. Like a lot of the young guys like loved him, and so him being like essentially a cap casualty. I think he signed for like 1 year, $5 million in Minnesota. Is like so like not a very expensive contract, but losing AT hurts a lot. He was beloved in Detroit. He played really well previously, like a year or two ago. Also understand Van Gundy for the Pistons the year they made the playoffs, and so like he's got a cult following in Detroit. We'll miss him. Those other guys, Jameer Nelson, definitely not. Eric Moreland was an effective, like a surprisingly effective backup center at times for the Pistons last year, but not very established, not a threat to score, really only a threat to like rebound and block the occasional shot. So it makes sense that I think Zaza's an upgrade over Eric Moreland, so it makes sense that he's gone. Kay Felder was on a two-way and he's 5'9". Like I don't think that guy's an NBA player. No offense, Kay. He's got the Michigan ties. He's an Oakland grad. So like there's a small but vocal subset. It's like, hey, give Kay Felder a chance. It's like, come on, guys. Like, you know what we're about. Dwight Bikes. Dwight Bikes was the third string point guard. He was also like surprisingly effective at times, but more often than not, he was just like a really, really, really poor man's Reggie Jackson, which is like not. It was kind of what the Pistons needed, but also just kind of not what the Pistons needed. It was fine to let him go as well. I think that was everybody that you mentioned.
You touched on them all.
Yeah.
Kory, any thoughts on you on these guys?
I just think you missed Tolliver a little bit. He could stretch the floor, shoot the three a little. It seemed like he was a good locker room guy as well for them. So for me, Anthony Tolliver is probably the only guy they truly do miss.
Yeah, Tolliver, who was it? Somebody flew out to Tolliver to see him at his house the day free agency opened. I think it was maybe the Clippers or someone, not the team that signed him, and everybody was very interested. Obviously, a lot of good things about him. But
yeah,
moving
Tolliver
on,
is a great guy, and he will be sorely missed in Detroit. Sorry.
No problem. I mean, it definitely seems like he's very popular around the NBA. But moving on to the prediction portion of the show, starting five on opening night for the Pistons.
So the starting five for opening night against the Nets, actually.
There we go.
Yeah,
well, we'll have to get you on the Brooklyn Buzz for the first episode of that.
Yeah, I'd like that. It'll be Reggie Jackson, Reggie Bullock, Glenn Robinson III, Blake Griffin, and Andre Drummond.
All right, well, you can copy and paste from me because that's the same starting five I have as well.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go with that one. You kind of convinced me on the Glenn Robinson III. I was kind of leaning towards Stanley Johnson, but, obviously he hasn't shown a lot and so far in his NBA career. How big a season do you think this is for Stanley Johnson in terms of where he's going to be in the NBA? His contract does run up this year as well, right?
Yeah, it does. This is his RFA year, I think, next year. This is it feels weird to say because like last year, the story going in to the season was like, oh, the Pistons traded Marcus Morris. They're basically like handing Stanley the starting small forward job on a platter. Like we really need him to be a big piece for us. And he played pretty well to start the year. Then he hurt his hip. He had like a slight hip injury, and then he came back, and then he was like never really quite the same. But at the same time, what he showed was a lot of what he had shown the previous 2 years, an inability to make spot up shots, an inability to like his shot is not very versatile. He has no left hand at all, which is like strange to say of an NBA player who's like made it 3 years in the league. But like if it's like, so Brandon Jennings, you remember Brandon Jennings is like super left-handed where like he'll finish on like the right side of the basket with like his left hand and stuff. Like Stanley does that, but like it's right-handed, so it's less noticeable. But like once you're looking at it, you're like, oh God, he never does anything with his left hand. He for large stretches of the season, he was the best perimeter defender the Pistons had, and I think he's still that right now. But at the same time, his offense is just so damaging, and the defense's like lack of respect for him is so damaging to the offense that I don't think he can start. So like what a successful year this year for Stanley Johnson looks like is that like he keeps he like remains the on-ball defender that he was like last for the previous like couple seasons, and that he's like a better spot-up shooter, and that he's more accepting like of his role as a spot-up shooter and a guy who like the offense does not like flow through. He's a pretty good passer in like pick and roll situations, and he's good attacking the basket, but like not finishing. He can't really jump off 1 foot, and so like you'll see it's really weird to see like this 6'8", like strong as a bull guy try like these weird like crafty below the rim finishes because he can't jump. But like that's where we are with Stanley Johnson, and so this is a big year for him. But I think the Pistons have, between Reggie Bullock and Glenn Robinson III, and even like Casey has a propensity to play a lot of 3-guard lineups we saw on the bench last year. So even like the potential of like a Luke Kennard at 3, or like a Langston Galloway at 3, I think the Pistons have options if Stanley proves to be the same player he's been for the entirety of his career.
I find it so interesting. Obviously, I'm a 1 foot jumper, and like that players can't jump off of 1 foot. And I remember reading something or hearing on a podcast how it changed Donovan Mitchell. And when he first came into the league, he had trouble jumping off of 1 foot, but he developed that skill. And obviously, we know what he did rookie season. There was a lot of talk about 1 foot and 2 foot jumpers this year in the draft class. So I think that's really interesting about Stanley Johnson. And maybe he could learn how to jump off of 1 foot, and it could change his game.
Yeah, it's just really like, even when he gets off 2 feet, he's not like elevating super high, but he looks like much more effective. Like the 2 foot jumping is like good for like offensive rebounds and stuff when he gets to like really load up. But he's just like a really like naturally like bulky guy. Mm-hmm. And so it's hard to imagine a scenario in which like he's just like fully like exploding off the ground. That's what makes Zion Williamson so crazy to me.
Yeah.
Like, Zion Williamson weighs like 40 pounds more than Stanley Johnson. It's just like taking off and like dunking on guys.
He looks like a monster coming through. But, talking about position battles for the Pistons, where do you think there's going to be some competition, if any?
So on the wing, I laid out the starting lineup, and I made that sound like super confident. But I think Luke Kennard will have a lot to say about who's the starting shooting guard. Luke was we just talked about Donovan Mitchell, and Donovan Mitchell's a sore spot among Pistons fans because it appeared that they were going to take him and didn't. And I think that soured a lot of people immediately towards Luke from the get-go. But Luke was like quietly really effective for the Pistons last year. Shot over 40% from 3, over 40% from the floor. Was a better passer than advertised. He's not like making reads out of pick and rolls and stuff, but like he's always got his head up. He always like knows where everybody is in the court. He's just I hate to use like the white guy cliche, but like he just has a really high basketball IQ. He's just a really smart, heady player. And the Pistons like could use a little bit of playmaking in the starting lineup, so I think he'll have something to say about that. So between like him and Reggie Bullock for the starting shooting guard, and then like Langston Galloway has been kind of a forgotten man for this team. He was like ostensibly brought in to be the backup shooting guard over Luke and like the tertiary point guard option. It turns out he can't play point guard, which Stan like should have known by watching Langston Galloway play basketball before. Like, it's just wild to me. But he was a really effective shooter for a good chunk of the year. His numbers dipped down the same time Reggie Jackson got hurt, and then he kind of fell out of the rotation, and then his numbers cratered. I think he shot like under 30% from 3 for the year after Reggie Jackson got hurt. And he was like above 40% before Reggie Jackson got hurt. So I think that there's like definitely situations where the Pistons can like leverage a guy who can shoot 40% from 3 and has like zero conscience. I don't know if you guys have ever seen Langston play, but that dude will just like throw shots up.
I watched him a lot when he was on the Knicks.
Yeah, that dude, he's got one of the radio guys at the beginning of the season called him Green Light Galloway because like he always just like shot no matter what the situation was. And when it's going in at a 40% clip, you'll take it. And when it's going at like a 27% clip, you're not going to take it. It's not
like,
good.
Nah.
Yeah. I think Casey will find like a role for him in the rotation, I think, if anything. And then obviously we talked previously about me being high on Glenn Robinson III, and Stanley Johnson will fight him, I think, for the starting small forward spot. But other than that, yeah, I think just the shooting guard and small forward spots are really the position battles to look forward to this season.
Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think it's between the shooting guard and the small forward. Unless Zaza comes in hot and heavy, and maybe there's a battle of center now. So, yeah, so I think, Luke Kennard, I mean, he impressed me. He's a shooter. I was really high on him when he was coming out of Duke. I was kind of hoping the Pacers were going to be able to get him as a shooter for the 2 guard. But Luke Kennard's been solid. So I wouldn't, between him and Reggie Bullock for that 2 guard, and then as you just mentioned, between Glenn Robinson III and Stanley Johnson. At the end of the day, I think if Glenn Robinson III is being effective offensively, I don't think Stanley Johnson has a chance.
Moving on from starters in rotation, who's going to be the breakout starter? Who's going to be the guy that kind of shows up in the starting lineup?
So I think so again, I think it's Glenn Robinson III. I think like Kory said earlier, there was a potential for Glenn Robinson III to be like the starting small forward for the Pacers last season. And before he got hurt, and a lot of people either like conveniently forget that or just aren't thinking about it, and like don't think about the fact that the Pistons like signed a guy who would have been the starting wing on a 4 seed like in the playoffs in the East. Like that would if you like said that about any other team, like I think more would be made about it. I think Glenn has he's won a dunk contest. Like he's just really he just really fits, I think, what the Pistons are looking for in a starting small forward. He's got local ties. He went to Michigan. I think that the fans will really embrace him straight out of the gate. And so I think I'm really high on Glenn Robinson's breakout chances. I wouldn't put like money on him to win like most improved or anything like that, but I definitely think that you'll see a lot more of Glenn Robinson III than you have like ever before.
Yeah, I mean, I remember I just want to say, I remember someone on Twitter tweeted at me when Glenn Robinson first came back and was like, "This guy's a bum for missing most of the season with a sprained ankle." And I was like, "Yo, he broke his ankle. It wasn't a sprain. Relax, dude.
Right.
He didn't miss 60 games from a sprained ankle." Yeah, so I just wanted to interject that. My breakout starter, though, I'm going with the easy choice. I think it's going to be Blake Griffin. This is really, I mean, obviously he was the man that, for 33 games in Los Angeles since Chris Paul was gone. But I think this is his first season to really be the man of a team. He's going to be given the ability, I think, to be a point forward. I think he's going to have a lot of the offense be generated through him, especially if Reggie Jackson goes down. And I'm just expecting Blake Griffin to, have, if not maybe his best season in the NBA. Maybe he averages, 24 to 25 points per game and, 8 and 8 from rebounds and assist standpoint. I think Blake Griffin, now that he's been there for, what was he there for 25 games for a quarter of this quarter, maybe now since he's been there for longer, he'll have more chemistry with the other guys. They've added, if Reggie Jackson comes back and he's healthy, they're adding a point guard because Blake Griffin really didn't get to play with him. So I think Blake Griffin's set to have a big year for Detroit.
Yeah, I'm going with Blake as well for a lot of the reasons you said, Kory. I think chemistry-wise, he's going to improve. I believe I saw him working out with Andre Drummond a lot this summer too. He looked good in the gym, and I think just having an off-season with the team, and I think Casey's going to get the best out of him. And like you mentioned, this will be a chance for him to be that star guy and lead a team to the playoffs. Laz would know a little bit better, but it seems like he's kind of embracing Detroit as well.
So no, Blake is I think Blake is definitely a really good call. Before the season ended, he mentioned to a couple of the beat reporters in Detroit that he was really excited for the first time in I think 3 years to have an off season where he wasn't rehabbing an injury. And so we saw some Instagram video and we've seen some workout tape of Blake, and he looks like he's not quite as bouncy as he was before, but he's definitely not this ground bound Zach Randolph-esque guy that a lot of people have in their mind when they think oh, Blake Griffin can't dunk anymore. No, this dude is still an elite level athlete, and he's a better passer and more intelligent than he's ever been as a basketball player. And so I hope you guys are right and that he averages 25, 8, and 8. That would be great. That would make the Pistons a definite playoff team.
Yeah, and I think he did a great job of dealing with the injuries and kind of working more on his skill set and kind of developing there, which allowed him, and which will allow him to age a little bit better too. But who's going to be the breakout bench player for the Pistons?
So I'm gonna go with Luke Kennard. Again, like a lot of people are, they have a bias against Luke just because he's not Donovan Mitchell. But I think that having a bench role in which his playmaking ability and shooting will be prioritized will help him greatly. There was, I think, another year in the NBA, like comfortable with where he's at in the rotation will help him a lot. There was a lot of times last year where like he would just not pull the trigger on shots that like he can make because he's such a great shooter. And like it got to the point where like Andre was telling him to shoot. And when like Andre is telling other guys to shoot, like it's bad. And so I think having the confidence to like pull the trigger and be a more aggressive offensive player will cause Luke Kennard to be a breakout bench guy for the Pistons.
I'm gonna have to agree. I wanted to pick someone different, but that's who I have as well as Luke Kennard. The numbers were good last year for a rookie. I think now he'll be a little bit more comfortable. It takes a little bit to catch up to the NBA speed of things. He still shot 41% from three last year. He only played an average of 20 minutes per game. So I'm looking for him to become a big time shooter for them off the bench.
Sadly, I'm going to pick the same guy. I think one promising thing you can look back at his college career with Duke, where he kind of improved every year. So I think looking at the Pistons, he'll probably definitely take a step this year and be that lethal 3-point shooter. But season predictions, what's best case scenario win-wise for the Pistons?
So the best case scenario for the Pistons would be like 48 wins, like not quite a 50-win team, but like the pace that they were on last season when Reggie Jackson was healthy and Reggie and Blake both play like 75 plus games. In that case, they're just like they're like a top 15 offense and a top 15 defense where they're not spectacular at either end of the court, but they're just very, very solid. And in a weaker Eastern Conference, that's enough to get you where you want to go a lot of nights. That's like Blake Griffin and Andre Drummond, like both are all-stars in the East type production, and the Pistons like are not the 8 seed. They're like scrapping it out for like the 6 seed or the 5 seed or something like that. That's the absolute like best case scenario for this team. And there are certain matchups that I think I would like if the Pistons were to make the playoffs. I think there are certain teams that are better matchups for the Pistons like in a playoff setting. Some teams they just like literally don't have a center that can handle Andre Drummond. And so like that will be like the Pacers. The Pistons went 3-1 against the Pacers last season. And Miles Turner nor Sabonis nor Kyle O'Quinn can like do anything to Andre Drummond. And so I think that the best case scenario includes the Pistons like getting one of those matchups in the playoffs, pulling off an upset in the first round, and then like promptly getting their heads kicked in by like Boston or Toronto or whoever.
You had to bring it up, right? Couldn't help yourself. Nah, the Pacers struggle when they go against teams that can rebound well, and obviously Andre Drummond's a good rebounder. Miles Turner, you better get bigger, bro. I think the best case scenario for the Pistons, though, is pretty close to what you said. I have them down at getting 47 wins, being somewhere between the 6 and 4 seed range, and that's if everything goes well. And maybe a team like Toronto is bringing in Leonard. Maybe they struggle to find some kind of rhythm. Obviously, they have a new head coach as well. But I think between the 6 and 4 seed is probably best case scenario for the Pistons.
Yeah, I'm around the same as you guys, around 47 to 48 wins, 6th or 5th seed. And I think they could, upset somebody in the first round or at least give them a really tough series just with Andre Drummond and Blake. A lot of teams don't have two bigs that can match up against those guys. But worst case scenario for the Pistons next year.
Oh man, you're really going to make me do it.
Yeah, I want it as negative as possible.
So the worst case scenario would be like Reggie Jackson only plays like 45 games again. Blake Griffin also only plays like 45 games. And that the offense craters when it's just like Andre Drummond and like no real other help on the court. That would mean the Pistons would probably win like somewhere north of 35 wins, but like not that much farther north. 35 wins, and they would miss the playoffs. In like that scenario, the best thing the Pistons could hope for would be like a leap from one of their young guys, from like Luke Kennard balls out, or Stanley Johnson improves a lot. But if that were the case, I think you would definitely, like, the next offseason, you would see like major roster change. Well, major roster changes is tough because it's like you trade Blake or you trade Andre, and like that counts as major. But I think you'd see like Reggie Jackson being shopped, or like them refusing to tender Stanley Johnson, like what's happening with Rodney Hood right now in Cleveland. And there would, like, you kind of just like hope you can build something around Blake, Andre, and like Luke Kennard, which I hope that's not where they are next year.
Yeah, my worst case scenario is 33 wins, and that's, Reggie Jackson getting hurt and maybe even Blake Griffin getting hurt. The combination of those two guys going down would just make this team a dumpster fire, I think. And then even still, if Reggie Jackson misses extended time, I don't know how this team fares without a point guard. As Laz has mentioned numerous times in this podcast, this team really fell apart when they lacked a actual point guard.
Yeah, 36 wins for me is worst case scenario. Same thing, injuries to Blake or injuries to Reggie Jackson. Either of those guys, maybe even Andre Drummond or something happens. Anytime you lose a big piece for a team that's not super deep with talent, I think it could hurt them in the win column. But I want to
say that like even like a minor injury to Reggie and Blake at the same time, even if both of those guys, like if they crash into each other or something, I don't know, if like both of those guys miss the same 10 games, like that would be a really rough stretch for Detroit. And so like I think you can afford to, like, if you're hoping for 60 games out of both of them, you can afford to have like Reggie Jackson without Blake Griffin for 55 of those games. You can afford to have Blake Griffin without Reggie Jackson for 55 of those games. But like both of those, you can't lose both of those guys at the same time. That would be really rough.
Yeah, for sure. And I agree. I think if you were to lose both those guys, especially from the playmaking standpoint, it would be rough on the team. But actual prediction for next season?
I have them winning 43 games, and depending on how you feel about like Miami and Washington, either like solidly in the 7 or 8 seed, or like just barely in the 8 seed. I think that's the best. It's the most like fair prediction I think I can come up with from a perspective that I hope is unbiased. So the Pistons have an interesting schedule. They like at the beginning of December they play another like 6 straight playoff teams again, and like that'll be kind of rough. The schedule evens out for them a little bit at the end of January and beginning of February. And so I think that if they can like stay afloat between like the beginning of December and like the middle of January, I think they'll be fine. I think they'll solidly make the playoffs.
Yeah, I think it's funny. I'm higher on the Pistons than you, and I don't even like the Pistons.
It's probably the nicest thing I ever heard you say about the Pistons.
Like I probably watched them more, which is why.
I'm going with 44 wins. I think this is a playoff team. I think they're realistically a 7 or an 8 seed. I don't know what to expect from Miami because, as of right now, it feels like everyone on that roster is available. So I don't know if they're going to go like full, like at the deadline, just sell off the entire team. But I think the Pistons are a playoff team. I think they're a 7 or an 8 seed. And that's bearing any injuries. That's, Blake Griffin playing 60 plus games, Reggie Jackson playing 60 plus games. But I just think the East too, as we mentioned, is pretty weak. And as you guys have mentioned, there's not I was looking at other rosters, there's not a pairing really in the East, aside from maybe like Joel Embiid, that can really, limit Andre Drummond and Blake Griffin. I mean, these guys can really dominate this conference.
Yeah, I'm pretty much around the same spot as you guys. 42 wins. I think they'll probably squeeze into the 8 seed, possibly the 7 seed, depending on how all things work out. But moving on to the most important segment of the show, the truth. what emoji represents the Pistons for you?
This is a tough one because I have an Android, so I'm not like a huge emoji guy. Is there a like ambulance emoji? We'll go with the ambulance emoji because if either Reggie Jackson or Blake Griffin get hurt, the season's kind of in the crapper.
Kory, what do you got?
For me, I got the it's the what I don't even know how to describe the face. So like it's like a flat face, but like the one eyebrow is raised and the one eyebrow is lower, and it's kind of just like a I don't know how to describe, like a what is it? Like I don't really know what you're doing here kind of thing. Because I see this team on paper and I look, well, this team is healthy. You know, they're a really good team in the East. And then I go, well, if Jackson goes down, then this team could be really bad in the East. So it's like a concerned face. I'm not thinking about it. I'm just a little concerned.
So me and Laz are pretty much on the same page. I have the hospital emoji because same reasoning, you know, Reggie Jackson, Blake Griffin goes down, or any type of big injuries could really hurt this team. And I think it's going to kind of determine their season, sadly.
Yeah, I like it.
League pass wise, though, where do you rank the Pistons 1 through 10?
Like on a scale of 1 to 10?
Yeah, scale of 1 to 10. Obviously, you're a Pistons fan, so you could give them a 10 if you want. I did the Nets, I gave them a 10, so it's all on you.
Nah, I would not. I've watched like 140 Pistons games like over the last 2 years. I do not suggest that like other basketball fans do that if they value their sanity. I would probably give the Pistons like a solid like 6.5. The Pistons, like last year, I don't know how it'll be under Casey, but like the Pistons were not a very entertaining team to watch. They play pretty slowly. There's a lot of emphasis on like rebounding and 3-point shooting. There were like like I said earlier, there were long stretches where like they just wouldn't score, and so like that'd be eternally frustrating. Like as a viewer, just like something happened, please. And so, but like they do have Blake Griffin, who's an exciting player. They do have Andre Drummond, who does exciting things occasionally. He's at his best when he's like being really boring, but he wants to be like really exciting. So he'll do stuff occasionally, like, oh wow, that's interesting. And so we'll see how that goes. But yeah, I think if I'm being perfectly honest, like a 6.5 would be fair for the Pistons.
I'm going with a 4. I'm not gonna lie, I'm not a big Pistons fan. But you know, it's
No way.
The Pacers and Pistons don't like each other generally anyways, so I feel like that's fair. So I think it's a 4. I mean, they're interesting if they're healthy, like Blake Griffin, Andre Drummond, and Reggie Jackson. It's going to be really interesting. I'm obviously going to watch every game that they play the Pacers. I don't know how much of the other games I'll tune into, but I think there is some intriguement, and I want to see, you know, guys like Glenn Robinson, who I've watched, you know, his entire tenure in Indiana. I would like to see how he blossoms in a bigger role, hopefully in Detroit.
I will say we have one of the I subscribe to League Pass. I'm like a pretty avid League Pass viewer. We have like a top 5 broadcast crew in George Blaha and Greg Kelser. Those guys have been doing it a long time, and they know how to call a game and keep a game interesting, even when it might not be. So,
and low-key, that's a big factor for League Pass.
That matters. Who has a really
the Rockets is pretty bad.
Yeah, the Rockets are really bad.
Celtics is really bad.
Yeah, Celtics is bad. Like if you touch a Celtics player,
I can like handle Tommy in like small doses. Or if the Celtics are like playing a team I'm like predisposed to dislike. Like when the Celtics play the Sixers, I'm like, yeah, Tommy, give it to me. Ben Simmons is terrible. Let's do it.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I mean, sometimes I just kind of laugh about it. When they're really biased, I'm just like, oh, God. But for me, I think Pistons about a 5.5. You know, they're more interesting for me with Casey now, and I kind of want to see how Blake kind of fits with everything and what happens along those lines. But what TV show would you watch over the Pistons? You know, obviously, this is a hypothetical because you're probably going to watch every game. But if you had to pick one TV show, what would it be?
Oh, man, this is really tough.
We save the tough questions for the last.
I don't really watch a lot of TV. I watch a lot of like other sports. So I will say I'd rather watch the Pistons than any non-Michigan State college football game.
That's fair.
So There you
That's
go.
fair.
If I don't know
It's a unique response, so we like it.
What's I don't like what was I can't even like remember like the last non-sports show I like watched. Oh, Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Oh, but that's really funny though. I'd rather watch that than the Pistons.
That made it in my top 20 list, so I'll be using it later on. Kory and I have the task of trying to find one for every team.
Yeah.
Kory, what do you got today?
For me, I'm going with Master of None. I've watched like 3 episodes. It's with Aziz Ansariyo. I mean,
Wait,
I like
you didn't
him. He's
finish the
funny.
season? No way.
Yeah, I know, right? I feel all my good
Every
shows
show you bring up,
are
it's like, I started this one, but I only watched 4 episodes.
There's too many options between Netflix, Sling, and Hulu. Okay, come on, a guy only has so many hours a night. I think I would try that show again. It's one of those shows I used to like put on before bed. I'd watch like 15 minutes, laugh a few times, and then wake up to my TV on the next day. So that for me is Master of None.
Okay, I got a real answer now because that jogged my memory about like Netflix shows I've watched like 4 episodes of and then like never actually returned to. Altered Carbon. I would watch the Pistons over Altered Carbon.
Interesting. I always see that one pop up on my feed, but I never gave it a chance.
Right? It's like a weird sci-fi like detective mystery type thing, but the lead guy is like the tobacco chewing guy from Suicide Squad. So like he doesn't have like the strength to like pull off this like really what's supposed to be like this really like intriguing guy. He just like looks bland all the time. It's like I can't care about you, man. I don't care about the mystery.
Yeah,
so I'd rather
lead
watch.
Characters are always important.
Yeah, there you
go. For me, I'm going to go with a show that's pretty good. I'm going to go with The Flash. Nothing crazy. It can be corny at times, but it's a good. It has a decent plot line, and obviously, I'm big into comics, so I like it.
So what season is The Flash on?
Well, I believe it is on season 5, but I watch on Netflix. So actually, I think it's on season 6, and I'm on Netflix, so I usually am a little bit behind. I don't watch. Okay. I tend not to watch them live. I'm more of a binger.
I found like I made it through like 2 seasons into Flash, and then like other stuff happened. But I've always been meaning to like go back and pick it up. Knowing that I'm like 3 seasons behind is not great, but yeah, I might try that in like the month we have between now and the season.
In some ways, it is great because then you don't have to worry about it stopping. I hate when a TV show ends or when I have to wait for the next season. It's just like, oh god. So I'm a binger. Like I love when there's like mad episodes to watch. Like I restarted watching CSI not that long ago because there's like so many seasons. That's a terrible show.
5 seasons of CSI.
Yeah, exactly. So I know I'll never run out.
All those type of shows, like like Law and Order SUV is different, but like almost every NCIS and CIS, like I just can't stand. Like they're all just so generic.
I like CSI a little bit better than those ones because it's a little bit more like scientific in a way. I'm not sure how accurate it is, but I feel like I'm getting a little bit smarter when I watch.
I know the one show like that I had to like wean my mom off of was Criminal Minds because like they were always finding serial killers or whatever. So she would be like, there's way more serial killers in the world than there actually are because she's like consistently watching these people get murdered every week. And like, Mom, you got to give this up. Like, this is bad. It's like, no, it's like this, like the guy in the grocery line is not a serial killer. Like, you got to let it go, Mom.
He may look strange, but I promise you he's not going to try to kill you.
Right.
He can hold the door open for me. I think he's a killer.
But any last thoughts you guys want to get in on the Pistons?
Let's see. I would definitely check out. So I would definitely check out the first game the Pistons play against the Celtics in October, like before Boston like really gets a chance to get themselves used to playing next to Gordon Hayward and everything. Andre Drummond always like steps up his game against Al Horford. That's one of the guys he regularly tries to go at. And so, and Minnesota, whenever the first game against Minnesota is, Drummond he averages like 17 and 17 against Karl Anthony Towns. It's insane. They've never lost to the T-Wolves because I don't know what Karl did to Andre, but like it must have been heinous because he hates that dude.
He must have pulled some type of robbery. But Kory, anything for you?
Nah, we're not gonna go 3-1. We're not gonna go 1-3 this year against the Pistons. That's all I got.
We will see.
Laz, big thanks for you hopping on for the first time. We really appreciate it. Tell the people where they can find you and find your work.
So you can find me at Detroit Bad Boys. I also host the Detroit Bad Boys podcast, which you can find wherever you find your podcasts. You can also follow me on Twitter at LazChance. That's at LazChance. I talk mostly Pistons, but I have a general idea of like what's going on in the NBA as a whole, and I love to talk basketball, and I'll talk basketball with you if you're not a dick.
You can't be a dick. But as always, Kory, a pleasure to do another preview with you, and appreciate everybody listening. You can check out the show, iTunes, Blog Talk Radio, OTGBasketball.com, Google Play, and Dash Radio.
Till next time, peace out, knuckleheads.